Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I wanted to go ahead and break down some of the Ruby Sapphire deck lists that we've been tinkering with ever since the Shimmering Skies cards came out. This is definitely one of the ink pairings that a lot of people are high up on, thinking that it will be top tier, and it has been putting up some early results in tournaments. There are 3 different variations we're going to take a look at in this video. I did post a video about one of them, and a lot of you were asking about the deck list, so linked in the description will be links to these deck lists here. You can check them out. But to start off, we're going to start with the easiest and most adaptable version of Ruby Sapphire, which I call the Classic. This is basically an adaptation from set 4 into set 5. There are a couple of new tools that we received that will be used pretty much in every Sapphire deck, like Tipo. This is a very versatile card that allows you to ramp early while also being inkable. Very, very important for the deck, being able to cut back on some of the uninkable cards in order to continue the ramp aspect but maintain more playability. We've also opted for a couple of small Sisu Daring Visitors. You can go up to 4 with this one for sure, but I wanted to keep the uninkable count as low as possible because I am planning to ramp into the big Sisu regardless. The little Sisu will help you mitigate some early game pressure, especially when you pair it with the ice blocks. And for that reason, you could say I could cut some of the brawls back and play more of the smaller Sisus, but that would also increase your uninkable count, so you have to be a little bit wary of that. The Gramatalas and the Hirams are your 4 drops, and the deck continues to struggle with the same thing in that once the Hiram is not seen, you don't really have any other form of advantage to be generated. And if the Hiram is seen, you play it, and if it gets outed right away, then you're just potentially running out of gas again very, very quickly. The deck still functions on being able to ramp quite quickly in order to start dropping big threats, and the reason why we're not playing Medusa here and we're focusing on the bigger Sisu is you just want more value, right? The Sisu here can clear multiple things, especially with an ice block, lowering things down, and the biggest reason is it hits a lot of the ward targets that sit there in a ready state, obviously without needing to be ice blocked, things like the Muses and Prince John. We no longer have to worry about Bucky, but the discard cards and the Emerald Bounce cards can be a little bit problematic for this deck. Also, against aggro, this card is just much higher impact. You drop this, clears the board, it stabilizes you much more than a Medusa hitting one small thing. And again, with the ice blocks, the Sisu is basically a more efficient version of Medusa. So for that reason, I've opted to cut them from my list. If you wanted more removal, of course you can include them, but again, with every additional uninkable you include, it makes your deck harder and harder to pilot and much more prone to bricking. The Mauis are, just continue to be that 5-drop removal option that is likely to be played early thanks to you ramping a turn or 2 ahead. And then the Cusco gives you some counterplay options against the location decks, mainly Ruby Amethyst with their Queen's Castle, if they opt to still play that, which it looks like they are. And this card can definitely help you really mitigate a big problem in letting that castle just run away with the game. On the action side, I've never really been too much of a big fan of Develop Your Brain. It's a decent card, but paying 1 to just look at the top 2 seems really underwhelming. The reason why this card can be so beneficial for a deck like this, though, is simply for the fact that you don't really care about negative tempo, about negative card advantage to a certain extent, as long as you have enough gas to continue playing, that is, of course. But you just care about developing your setup. You care about finding the pieces that you need, setting up your ramp, and start dropping removal. We've seen on stream at DLCs, in big tournaments, big stake matches, that opposing players against red-blue are able to get to 16, 17, 18 lore, but then as soon as red-blue drops the established threats, the opposing players just can't close out the game. Anything that they play is getting constantly removed, and the Ruby Sapphire player can go from 0 to 6 to 14 to game in a single sequence, more or less, right? A couple of turns. So it can be very oppressive once you get your setup going, which is why this deck is so strong. That being said, though, it is still very fragile in my opinion. The Visions of the Future is also one of the strongest additions to this deck. Again, my Yu-Gi-Oh players, you know, Pot of Prosperity, that's basically what this card is. Absolutely insane card. Play it early game, play it late game, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a good card no matter what to help you find exactly what you need. And these cards just help you increase consistency. Again, Develop Your Brains might be cut from this list in the long term, but it being an inkable card that allows you to scry, help you go through your deck, find what you need, is not necessarily the worst either. You'll notice again, no Medusas, but also no Maleficent Dragons, and the reason for that is simply because the format is faster, and in a deck like this, you need to definitely do what you can to keep up. So your removal options have to be more efficient, hence why we're including some of the smaller Sisus and focusing more on the bigger Sisus. The Be Prepared continue to be a very critical juncture point in this deck, being able to be prepared on 6, 7, 8, and in the future. Yes, it can get ripped out of your hand with Ursula Deceiver, but that's why you're also leveraging 3 Empowered Sibling to wipe boards as well. The brawls aren't necessarily the greatest. It is a negative tempo loss, right? So there is something to consider there, maybe cutting these for the Sisu like I mentioned. But it being an inkable card provides you with a little bit more safety. Yes, the Sisu is more efficient, but the brawl being inkable just can sometimes matter a lot more. So again, we're only on 17 uninkables in this build, which will allow you to make sure that you don't brick too often. The 1 jump aheads are still included. This is a card that can be sang by the Tipo, which is nice, but also inked by the Tipo if you don't need that extra ramp, if you don't have a card draw engine or something along those lines in order to refill your hand if you're ramping too aggressively. The 1 jumps along with the Tipo just gives you a little bit more consistency in being able to ramp on 3, on 2 or on 3 if you sing the 1 jump, which is actually very good. You'll notice again the lack of the 4 drop uninkable How Far I'll Go, which is a good card, but it is kind of expensive, and it again can be a little bricky with a deck that already can brick on very high costing cards like the Sisu, like the Be Prepared. So there is a lot to consider there, but in the end, I think the Tipo and the 1 jumps do enough in order to ramp you more efficiently, and you can afford to hopefully mitigate the small amount of card advantage that you get from the How Far I'll Go, and hopefully you see a Hiram at some point in order to generate the advantage. For the item package on the classic list, 2 Vitalosphere I think is still going to be played. It makes the Grandma a 5/3 body. It makes the Maui an 8/5 body, which is important. It can make Cusco a 5/5 and the Sisu a 7/4. So again, very relevant stat lines in order to take out certain things, and also giving rushes a nice side ability. You have been seeing Potion of Might be included in some builds because it gives +3 strength or +4 to a villain if you don't necessarily need the rush ability. So that is also a potentially beneficial card that you could be playing in it instead of Vitalosphere. Next up, you got 3 Ice Blocks, 4 Popsicles, 4 Fishbones, and 2 Lucky Dimes. The Fishbones, I would say, are a little hit or miss in a build like this because, again, you don't necessarily want to be losing all of your advantage from hand if you don't have a card draw engine like the Hiram in order to make up that advantage. So the Fishbones have to be used very strategically. It depends on the matchup, I think. Otherwise, you're just focusing on ramping with the Tipo and the 1 jumps perhaps, and then maybe you do ramp once with the Fishbone, but not like aggressively with Fishbone because it's still an item that you can banish with the Hiram to draw. But there are those considerations to be made as well. Still a strong list, just one that I think is very hard to pilot under a control matchup, a control mirror, where your opponent can easily disrupt and slow you down, or just out aggro you if you don't see your exact pieces when you need them in order to slow them down. Moving on to the workshop build, I personally like this build a little bit more because, again, you have more than just a Hiram draw engine. In this build, we also have the 4 Maurice's Workshop, and all it really takes is 1, maybe even 2 of these, and you have a ton of card advantage being able to be generated since you play much more items. I will say, similar to what I said last time, like with the game being faster now, I think I would definitely cut these Maleficent Dragons from a list like this. I wouldn't necessarily go Medusa because this list only plays 18 uninkables, but I think you can find a more efficient card to play than the Maleficent Dragon. So a deck like this focuses again on ramping with the Tipo. No 1 jump aheads, but you can definitely fit them back in, maybe cutting the Maleficent Dragons for them. Again, increasing your uninkable count here is hurtful, so maybe you'd have to find some more efficient ways to mitigate the higher uninkable count. But you need to play your Sisus, and we're also playing the smaller Sisus here as well. We're on 4 Brawls and 4 Be Prepareds because this deck doesn't really want to drop anything. You can tell there's no Grammatalas or anything like that. We just want to build up our item stash and then eventually just go for game with the Tamatoa Dime. We're drawing a ton of cards with the Maurice's Workshop and or the Hiram, and we're just dealing with board states as they develop, right? Brawls, Be Prepareds, small Sisu, big Sisu, Maui's. Again, ramping into all of these things is very beneficial. And the Maleficent Dragon just seems a little too far away. And again, that one-time removal, pick one thing and remove it, just seems a little underwhelming compared to what Sisu can do, especially with an Ice Block. The item package is more or less the same. The only difference is you're playing a couple of Shield of Virtues and obviously the Maurice's Workshop. The shields allow you to facilitate readying up the Queen in order to exert again, so you can get double value and double items off of its ability, which is very strong if you set that up. But it can also help you protect and or deal extra damage to things. So for example, Maui running into something, readying up, running into something else can be very strong and help you stabilize board states as well. Again, just for the fact that it's an additional draw engine, I do like this one a little bit more than the classic version, even though a lot of people will tell you, and they're probably right, that the classic version is likely stronger. And the final iteration that I want to take a look at is a very spicy option, and one that looks to be pretty interesting because, again, very low on inkable count relative to what Red-Blue wants to play. But it does play, again, some of those higher costing ones, so that is to be considered. But this is a villains-oriented deck that ended up taking a big event over the first weekend in September 2024. It focuses, again, on villains, right? So you got King Candy, which is a 1-drop 2/2 body that is a villain. The Gaston, which is, again, a great counterplay option against Flynn Sisu if that continues to be played in Ruby Amethyst. LeFou is an ally, but Cruella de Vil is an evasive card that can help out like Diablos and things like that. Tipo is just your ramp option, not a villain. The Triton helps you generate lore, which is interesting. And then, of course, Hiram as a draw engine. And one of the biggest combo pieces of the deck is the Prince John, a villain, but allows you to exert it to play an item from your hand or discard that costs 5 or less for free, but it comes in exerted. The Maui is once again just removal. And then you're playing a couple of King Candies, the shift target, or the shiftable card for the shift target and the 1-drop. Or you can just hard cast this because 5 isn't really that expensive in order to draw 2 and then put 1 back. It also quests for 2 and it's 3/3 body. So the reason why all these villains are important is, one, they play nicely on curve. There's a lot of low to the ground stuff that allows you to make sure that you're able to play relatively low number of uninkables. And by the way, yeah, 3 brawls as well. But the Potion of Might here puts in a lot of work. It can make Gaston an 8/2 body, for example, the 2-drop Gaston, right? So a card like this, I think, is pretty strong. Again, you're seeing this being adapted into just like non-villain lists as well, just for the fact that the +3 strength can be very beneficial. But getting that extra strength, being able to run over anything, you might not necessarily need to rely on Cusco's as much, even though there's 4 in this build in particular. But the Potion of Might being able to beef up anything, like a Medusa goes to 8/4 as well, and it can run over a library or a castle in that case, right? Same with this Gaston, which is shiftable onto the smaller Gaston, which is nice. So yeah, a lot to consider there. You could also opt to run 3 Potion of Might, only 1 Shield of Virtue, because again, you'd want to try to protect maybe either the Triton or the Prince John the best you can. So after you exert them, you ready them back up. That's also why you're playing some LeFous. 4 Popsicle, 1 Poisoned Apple, 2 the Plank, and 2 Sword of Truth. So this combination of removal item options is very interesting. And once you have these in rotation, the Prince John being able to constantly recur these items is extremely strong. One thing you'll have to notice about a deck like this is none of these items force you to exert them in order to use them, right? So that's very important, since the item that you play with the Prince John ability here comes in exerted. So you have the Prince John, you pass turn, the opponent passes back to you. If this Prince John survives, it can now exert itself. You have all your ink available. You play that card from your discard for free. Let's say it's a Sword of Truth or a Poisoned Apple. Now whatever card your opponent developed will be banished. The Plank banishes Hero, the Poisoned Apple banishes the Princess, and the Sword of Truth banishes villains. So if your opponent has none of those cards, at least the Poisoned Apple will allow you to exert the non-princess character. And then the Plank, if you don't have an opposing hero character to banish, can at least ready one of your villain characters. So similar to Shield of Virtue and LeFou again. So a very interesting list that leverages a lot of very powerful cards to again remove threats, but cards that you wouldn't necessarily think of, right? In like Sword of Truth, Poisoned Apple, and the Plank. So that's going to do it for these deck lists. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. If you enjoy these kind of multi-deck ink reviews, we can expand on them a lot more, I'm sure, and look at a couple others. But again, thank you for watching. Quantum is out.